Ever since the start of Honkai Star Rail, damage over time characters have been a core playstyle within the game, and throughout several patch cycles, the roster of DOT-focused characters have grown. However, we've recently been in a fairly long drought of dot-focused units, ever since Black Swan's release in 2.0, and while the newest 5-star Jiao Cho has some minor dot capabilities, it's clear that his introduction is mainly focused for use in other team comps, such as in Acheron or Dr. Ratio teams. Due to this, damage over time teams have begun to fall behind for numerous reasons. Hey all, it's Espresso Boy, and today I'm going to be going over the DOT playstyle in Star Rail, including why I think it's falling behind, what its strengths are, and how the playstyle might be able to evolve in the future. Dot emerged as a popular and effective damage type during Star Rail's 1.0 patch cycles, and while characters of this playstyle like Sampo were effective, the playstyle came into the meta with the introduction of Kafka in 1.2. Kafka is one of the few characters released in Star Rail that fundamentally changed the way the game is played, and how we as players understand how to navigate its gameplay mechanics. While effective, damage over time units always had the problem of having backloaded damage, as the majority of the character's damage output occurred on the enemy's turn instead of during the character's actions. This meant that in endgame modes like Memory of Chaos, dot teams fell behind as they took more cycles to clear. Kafka changed this, as her kit allows her to both detonate and amplify the damage that DOTs do on enemies during her action, while still contributing to dot application as well. Kafka's introduction indirectly buffed all prior and future DOT units, and made the Path of Nihility synonymous with damage over time, at least until Penacony. Penacony's introduction in 2.0 brought about the largest spike in difficulty that we had seen, with enemies gaining larger health pools, dealing more damage, having less forgiving mechanics, and endgame content expanding into new modes and in difficulty as well. With the arrival of 2.0 came with it a new Nihility unit, Black Swan, a wind-based DOT unit that currently applies the highest damage ceiling DOT effects in the game. At the start of 2.0, the premier dot team of Kafka and Black Swan was one of the most powerful team comps in the game, dominating the meta and clearing endgame modes with ease. However, in subsequent patches, the dot team comp was overshadowed by a plethora of new units and the introduction of new playstyles, highlighting the current weakness of the dot playstyle in Star Rail. The first main point I'd like to discuss is the high cost of entry to the dot playstyle that makes it arguably the most difficult playstyle to get into at the moment. Currently, the most powerful DOT units in the game are Black Swan and Kafka, and that's about it. Before 2.0, dot teams required Kafka to function optimally, but outside of that, any of the 4-star dot units could be paired with her to great effect, and even Kafka on her own had high enough damage scaling and application to compete in the meta. However, after Black Swan was introduced and the difficulty of the game overall increased, nearly all dot units began to fall behind. Even Kafka herself began to pale in comparison to new DPS units when considering her own damage potential. Instead, she took on much more of a supportive role based on her functionality as a detonator. This meant that Black Swan became one of the only Nihility units solely prized for the damage output of her own dot application, and from that moment on, dot's power rested on the pairing of both Kafka and Black Swan in endgame teams. With no more purely dot-focused units being released since 2.0, the limitations of the dot playstyle has become more and more apparent, with the required 5-star units players need to pull to get into their playstyle relegated to rerun jail for the rest of time, making the cost of entry incredibly high for players, especially those who started after 2.0. While many 4- and 5-star units of other playstyles began to struggle in the wake of 2.0's spike in difficulty, the introduction of new units have allowed earlier characters to continue to thrive. Characters like Imbibitor Lune, Qing Shui, Zila, and even Jing Yuan became more powerful with the introduction of Sparkle in 2.0. Follow-up units had a massive surge in power with the introduction of Robin, and Topaz has become more and more powerful as time has gone on, simply due to the fact that more follow-up DPS units have been added since her initially lackluster release. On top of this, new playstyles emerged in 2.0, such as break teams, and while break damage had existed since the start of the game, its damage potential wasn't brought into the meta until Penacony, which throughout its patch cycles has largely been focused on growing the catalog of break-style characters. And who can forget Acheron, who single-handedly reminded everyone that Nihility's most powerful units don't have to be DOT-focused. Acheron's introduction nerfed Dot indirectly. As Acheron became the highest damage ceiling character in the game, characters like Kafka and Black Swan began to evolve in their best team comps, becoming best-in-slot supports for Acheron teams. While a limited roster of effective Dot units is one factor that comes into play when discussing the declining power of damage over time teams, I believe there's another factor in play as well, that being the mechanics behind Dot itself. Currently in Star Rail, there are 4 basic types of damage over time in the game, correlating to different elements: wind shear, shock, burn, and bleed, with each type of Dot functioning differently. Early Dot units, such as Sampo, Gwynaifin, and Serval, enabled Dot damage through the basic use of DOTs. Sampo applied wind shear, Gwynaifin burn, and Serval shock. At the time, this damage was modest, but effective, able to do proper damage numbers with enough strategy and build investment. However, as the difficulty rose in 2.0 and enemy health bars grew, the damage numbers of basic Dot stayed the same, meaning the damage potential of these units was pretty much instantly nerfed. The one minor exception to this was the Bleed Dot and its 4-star enabler, Luca. Bleed differs from the other dots, as its damage scales off the power of the enemy to which it's applied. So when enemy health grew, so did the damage of Bleed, making Luca one of the only still somewhat viable 4-star Dot units based on application alone. This is why Black Swan remains as Kafka's only really reliable teammate. Black Swan's Dot applications differ from any other characters in the game, as she doesn't inflict basic dots. She instead inflicts a variant of the wind shear dot unique to her kit known as Arcana. These dots have their own multipliers and functions, such as their ability to stack up to 50 times and growing in function as the stacks hit certain points. Black Swan is able to surpass other units as her dots don't rely on the pre-2.0 power of basic Dot applications. While Dot is currently falling behind in the meta as a playstyle, I think it holds the most potential in the game. Dot's strengths come from its ability to be modified in various ways, and to brute force its way through enemies. DOT is the only damage type in the game that is tied directly to the enemies themselves. Any other instance of damage in the game, whether it be a follow-up attack, basics, skill, or ultimate cast, are single instantaneous damage applications, only affected by a character's build or amplified by a support or debuffer's previous actions. Dots instead are tied to the target and thus trigger the majority of their damage at the start of an enemy's turn. This means that in the time between enemy turns, dots can be stacked, modified, amplified, transferred, whatever it may be, before doing a nuke of damage on an enemy's turn, allowing for a high level of skill expression. So how might Dot evolve as time goes on, and what would I like to see from future units? One of the first things I think would benefit Dot the most, and what I think is inevitable, is the introduction of a true DOT support character. So far we have Sparkle for crit-based hypercarry units, Ruan-Mei for break teams, and Robin for follow-ups. And while all 3 of these harmonies can benefit other teams, including Dot teams, they don't focus on damage over time power directly. The introduction of 5-star supports focused on amplifying certain playstyles has breathed new life into old units, something Dot is sorely in need of. And while Kafka somewhat fulfills that role at the moment with her detonations, I don't believe it was really what her kit was designed for. Instead, a unit that buffs Dot in a way to make characters like Sampo, Gwynaifin, or Serval powerful on their own would fix some of the pitfalls that damage over time is currently facing. Perhaps an attack percent boosting harmony or nihility unit that features a unique Dot damage increase based on the amount of Dot stacks applied, the number of different Dot types, or the number of Dot units on the team. The other way to resolve the problem would be to buff basic Dots themselves, as the game's difficulty has changed significantly since 1.0. However, I think a support is a healthier and more likely solution to this problem. Perhaps this could be a strong role for the future Nihility Trailblazer. Harmony Trailblazer changed the game forever with the introduction of Super Break, allowing forgotten units like Shui and seemingly weak units like Misha do ungodly levels of damage. I'd love to see a day where Sampo is hitting 100 to 200k damage numbers with the right team comp. I would also like to see Dot continue to evolve away from the basic Dot instances, like with Black Swan's kit. Jiao Cho does this as well with his Ashen Roast application that acts as a burn dot. However, this dot has fairly low scaling, making it fairly negligible in the dot meta. I would really like to see a dot-focused Nihility unit in the other elements, not currently represented by dot. Perhaps an ice character that freezes enemies and does large shatter damage when a certain amount of dot stacks trigger on the enemy. Maybe an imaginary unit that transforms already applied basic dots to an imaginary dot unique to that character's kit. If a character like this existed, Sampo would be insane due to the amount of wind shear stacks he can apply to enemies. Or even a quantum unit that repeats dot detonations when enemies are in the quantum state. Perhaps maybe a unit whose dot evolves when first triggered on an enemy turn, making Kafka detonations undesirable and shaking up the team comps. DOT as a damage type is unique due to its ability to be amplified and modified before dealing its damage, and the more unique interactions dot characters bring to the table, the more attractive and powerful DOT becomes to the player base. We are also at a point where we need more dot characters, period. A powerful 4-star dot would go a long way to improve dot's damage floor. Without Kafka or Black Swan, players would currently have a very hard time completing dot-based simulated universe or event challenges. Something more accessible and powerful 4-star units could change, while dot takes its time to evolve throughout its 5-star releases. Okay, coming up with dot characters kits was actually really fun, so if you have any ideas for future characters or mechanics, let me know in the comments, because I'm actually really curious to see what kind of abilities you all come up with. While we have covered dot extensively, this video was not meant to downplay DOT's place in the game, nor was it meant to lower players' enjoyment of playing dot teams in the current meta. Dot has some very powerful units, but in my eyes, it's one of the last damage types currently represented in the game to still be elevated to new heights of power, besides maybe HP scaling units, which I could do an entire other video on, and if you'd like to see that, let me know, because I need an excuse to pull my blade out of hiding. I had a lot of fun putting together my thoughts for this video, so if you want to see more analysis-style videos on game mechanics or characters, let me know. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like it and subscribe to my channel. I really appreciate it, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!